Hello, hello, hello. Hello, everybody, from on this very beautiful, beautiful day from Queer.Love.Light. This is Desiree coming to you again on this beautiful day. And I'm so excited today because I have a very, very special guest in store for all of you. So, Queer.Love.Light is a sacred portal that I started to share spiritual musings, insights, and wisdom and practical techniques to activate our innate self healing power to raise our collective consciousness and make the world a better place. So today, our special guest is Isaias Queer Brown Vegan. So he is a amazing, awesome gay environmentalist that I think we have so much to learn from. And I've been so inspired by the work that he's doing, bringing education about our environmental issues around the world. So I'd love you to meet Isaias today. And without further ado, here is our special guest. Hello, Isaias.
Hi, Desiree. It's so lovely to see you and to chat with you.
I know. How are you today?
I'm doing really great. I'm feeling very blessed and also very sacred right now.
Oh, that's great. So I understand that you're from California in the United States, and I'm coming to you from Vancouver, Canada. I know we are causing a little bit of some grief to our cross-border sisters and brothers because of the wildfires. So, where are you right now? Are you in LA or in New York? I hear that in New York, it's quite a misery there because of the smoke.
Yeah, the sun was seen as dark red, but luckily I'm here in Los Angeles, California currently, so no air pollution for my lungs today, but it is very unfortunate to see the planet on fire in the global north right now.
Yes, yes. I was really surprised to see it in the news. It was actually, making headlines, and Canada doesn't make that many headlines, especially not in US media. But I saw, I think in New York Times today. And so it is a very timely topic that we will be touching on today from your work. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got started? Like, why did you, become interested in becoming an environmentalist?
Yeah, so my journey started growing up in Los Angeles. My parents had immigrated from Mexico in the late 1980s, and they truly believed in this concept of the American dream. And of course, I think there's a lot of physical and barriers and systemic injustices that they faced. Growing up in poverty really shaped my understanding of who I was as an individual and what I was allowed to say. And, I remember growing up at the time, I didn't really think much of it. You just think of it as you're just living or you're just trying to exist. I lived in affordable housing. My dad was a gardener. My mom would collect cans to recycle. LA was a very multicultural city. And so I really grew up in this cultural pot of obviously many immigrants coming from different countries. And I recognized my interest for the environment didn't really start when I was that young. I would say maybe in middle school, it started to begin as a conversation of like, I know that my parents would take me out on the weekends. My parents would talk to me about the farmlands that they grew up in Mexico and like what ended up happening. And I started to realize, what does global warming mean? Back then it was introduced. And this is like the year 2007, 2006. I mean, I was only 12 or 11 years old. And I started to think, I really like the environments, but I don't really know what that really means. And that's when I started to realize that as climate disasters were striking Los Angeles, like the wildfire seasons here in LA got worse, I started to recognize that these are really real impacts and real stories that are happening right now.
Yeah, especially today, as I mentioned, in between New York and also Toronto. So So tell us a little bit about the work that you do. I know that you are spreading the wisdom and education about our environment through social media, and you have quite a few followers, and you are also a very sought after public speaker as well in this. area. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're up to and about your work on as a social media content creator?
Yeah, absolutely. So I attended UC Berkeley and studied environmental science. I decided to study environmental science because my framework was under the impression that in order to save the planet, you need to major and specialize in that. And that was such a wrong assumption to have at the time when I was only 18. And after I graduated college in 2018, I got rejected from all the environmental nonprofits that you can think of for digital media or strategy roles. And so I created my account and the moniker Queer Brown Vegan in 2019 under the impression that I just wanted to educate people on climate issues, defining really basic terminology of like what is climate change, what is veganism, what is queerness, what is queer ecology. These are all questions I just wanted to really talk about on social media using Instagram and TikTok. Eventually that later evolved and years later, and I grew a large audience, thankfully, of over 150,000 within all combined platforms, not just one platform, but all platforms combined, over that. And it was really a huge shock to me because I didn't realize that so many people are craving environmental and climate education through non-institutional forms of knowledge. And I think one of the things that really brings my audience to my page or their curiosity is that I do cover a multitudes of different subjects that are not just singular on educating you of how to explain global warming. I try to really relate it back to the individual, to spirituality, to mythology, to the ideas of how we think as a society, because I don't think that everyone wants to learn about climate change to that extent. Some people want to know what can they do in their daily life to change it. And so since then, I really have been going into producing independent media projects that are focused on highlighting the works of grassroots leaders and environmental activists, and creating my own independent TV media show because that is the goal. And I recognize that I'm learning how to produce, how to edit, how to script things, how to fundraise for things, and recognizing doing everything very independent by yourself can be very isolating, but is also very fruitful to have that experience.
Well, thank you, Isaias, for sharing that. Coming from a background of being an independent filmmaker, I absolutely can empathize on, how much work that takes, and it really takes a village. Of course, we do a lot of the dirty work, but we also, need a lot of support, to help us produce the projects that we want to do. So I really, really congratulate you and kudos to you, for living your passion. So, what one of the things that drew me to you is the fact that you call yourself a gay environmentalist. So, can you talk a little bit about why is it important to come out? As gay, when you're talking about the environment that doesn't have a gender or sexuality for that matter.
Yeah, because I think the importance of being able to showcase my identity through nature is recognizing that there is no such thing as perfectionism and there is no such thing as unnatural in an unnatural world, right? We live in a naturally unnatural state, but we do not live in an unnatural world. And I think for a lot of people, we've been really constructed by binary type of thinking of this is natural, this is not, and you're not natural. And the ways in which that has been classified isn't through a human supremacy lens, but more so a white supremacist type of lens. Because if we remember that settler colonialism in the global north countries displaced many indigenous communities, it categorized and tried to put people in boxes for what they were based on the colonial ideology. And I think for me, as a queer person of color, just being honest and authentic to myself was seen as a metaphor that, there are existing queer ecology histories that have existed, and there are people who are gay, trans, lesbian, non-binary, femmes, like that have always been a part of the environment. And to say that they're not part of the environment because they're unnatural is to contribute to otherization, and that is to contribute to the degradation of the planet, because the idea of protecting the planet, indigenous leader Namonte Aquino said this, that you're not trying to protect the planet. You need to have reverence for, and having reverence and deep respect for the living systems that are here means you're having respect for my identity, my values, just as much as those that are straight and also navigating the world to protect the planet.
Wow, I love that. I really love that. It's so true that reverence, not just for the planet, but for each other, right? For who we are, and as we, it's not in mainstream science, but as we know, there are queer behaviors between animals or plants, for that matter. We have intersex animals too, those who can self-produce on its own, the hermaphrodites, right?
Yeah.
So what is natural and what is unnatural? I just love, how you put that, and also to remind people, to question, what is the norm and what is accepted, or not accepted. So thank you again for putting yourself out there. So tell me, what's the reception that you've had, ever since you've used that title for yourself? Like, what kinds of responses do you have from, different people?
Yeah, I think it depends on the certain group. I think from a marketing and branding perspective, a lot of people say that's a very creative username, queer brown vegan, because it flows really well. And I think that's just like the creative marketing behind my brain. But I think when it comes to different groups, I think like in LGBT spaces, they're like, okay, I get you're a queer person of color, but you're vegan. Like, what is that? How does that relate? Or I'm in POC spaces that are just talking about, race issues, and they're like, you're vegan and you're queer. Like, let's talk about that. Or if I'm in vegan spaces and animal rights spaces, they're like, why does queerness matter? And why does your race matter? So I do think that there's a lot of, I live within the contradictions of what a lot of people expect from me. And I think the last assumption is just generally that people think I'm an influencer that has no knowledge or no background or experience. And I do think that comes from elitism, white supremacy, racism, homophobia. And these are all things that really do shape the way that people determine my intelligence or the way that I'm worth. And that has been a very unique journey for me because I feel that even if I show up for who I am, my existence will always be threatened by an individual who always would feel uncomfortable around me just because I am existing next to them.
So you have to make yourself heard and seen, right? Just like most of us who are queer. And I mean, for myself, I'm very visible because of the way I look, but some people don't look, a certain way, and they just have assumptions of who you are. And even with myself, with the way I look, people make assumptions about me too, so
Absolutely.
until I explain or say something about it, they may not get it. So I totally see and hear you loud and clear in that regard. So, um, personal question, if I may. What's your choice? What behind becoming a vegan? Like, what's the reason behind that? I myself, I'm a vegetarian for the most part, but I can say that I probably can call myself a pescatarian as well because I do eat a bit of seafood,
Yeah.
but mostly vegetarian. So, what is your reason behind queer brown vegan?
Yeah.
Other than just the catchy name.
Yeah, I think with the veganism component, which is interesting because I usually tell people like veganism is not an identity in terms of your race or your sexuality. It's more of a cultural value or a religious value, you can say, or philosophical philosophy value. And I think on my end, I went vegan near the end of college because I really had a really hard time trying to understand the ways in which animals are grown in the global north system in a very industrialized setting. I mean, I think one of the honest and transparent conversations I have as a vegan is that I rely on heavily on an industrialized food system that is still
Mhm.
unsustainable. I rely and contribute to the oppression of many undocumented farm workers who still pick my produce. But I also think that as an individual who has the economic privilege for being able to obtain a degree and have a salary now, I do have the economic privilege to say no to exploitative institutions such as the meat industry that have destroyed my community, but has destroyed communities, cultures in the land, and has also consolidated the power in which small farmers can have. And so for me, I saw veganism as a way to divest from an exploitative institution for both the environmental lens, animal lens, human lens. And so my work today is really focused on how do we talk about human liberation and animal liberation together? Not to say that they are exactly the same, but to say that they fall under the oppression of white supremacy, on that end, with speciesism and racism being tangential to those subjects. And I think on my end, veganism isn't the solution. It may be a part of a solution, but I also recognize that there's a lot of limitations and restrictions that a lot of people live by. And I think, on my end, I have friends who are pescatarian. My best friend's pescatarian. I think with a lot of environmentalists today, they are very afraid to post anything meat or dairy related on their stories because they think environmentalists will rip them apart. And I would say that as a vegan, I do have the privilege to navigate that with grace because I know that I'll never eat any animal in my entire life. I've been vegan for 6 years, but it is very interesting to see that veganism for me was a way to kind of extend myself more towards a compassionate liberation lens. But it's not to say those who are not vegan are not compassionate either. It's just the way that I wanted to navigate life was to extend myself through that way. Other people may be doing other work that extends it in a unique way. For their values is to still consume animals, but for me it was to not consume animals. So I think to each their own, and also respecting that I never talk about veganism towards specifically rural indigenous communities that don't have access to these types of industrialized food markets.
Right. You are so well spoken, I have so much respect for youth like yourself, who is so well, educated and also informed, and you have such, amazing, values that you're sharing with, the world at large, especially, your own generation, because I think, a lot of people are looking for guidance or direction, when it comes to all these very complex issues in the world today. So, um, so let me ask you about how does your work as a queer environmentalist, play into your spirituality? What is your spiritual background, if you don't mind talking
Yeah.
about that?
I think it's very interesting because I think with queerness, it's always been a type of an occult for me. It's something that has drawn me in. I think as someone that grew up in a religious conservative household, that was very influenced by Catholicism and traditional parents, I was very indoctrinated to believe that the only type of love that exists is man and woman. And as someone that really battled in my younger years as a teenager to say, oh, these feelings are wrong because they don't follow the same Bible rules, but yet seeing allegations of harassment, with older men harassing children, I started to recognize there is something that is not truly being told here. Is it really I'm the issue, that's I'm the one that's saying I like guys that are my years as a teenage boy, or is the older man who's touching kids inappropriately, um, the main issue here, right? Or abusing children. And so I think for myself, when I left Catholicism, it was because I didn't really agree with a lot of the point view systems of how it upholds global capital structures, but how much everything has been almost rewritten and redesigned into a way to almost oppress the marginalized communities like Black, Brown, people of color, to oppress women, to oppress queer and trans people, and to reinforce this ideology of men and sexism. And I think that's something that really turned me off from the dominant religion of Catholicism. And so when I was in college, I was very interested in just exploring this idea of the dark side, but not so much this idea of evil energy or this idea of hurting anyone like that. I think in our system today and who we are as individuals, we have both light and darkness that exist, that coexist within us, right? There's days that that darkness comes out to be explored within the depths of the horror, but then there's also the light that shines so much bright on us that also harms us at times. And so I think for me, experimenting with Satanism wasn't just about, you know, the devil or other things like that. In fact, you know, one thing I always tell people is that Satanism was never about a certain religion. It's instead it has different interpretations and values, and the ways in which I practiced that wasn't so much of any rituals, anything like that. It was more about understanding the fact that I believe that people who give birth should have autonomy over their bodies. I believe that queer and trans communities should be able to liberate themselves and be able to feel safe. These are some of the common values of what dominant religious structures like Catholicism and Christianity painted Satanism to be. And so when I was in college, I really felt that I got to really express myself and write truly how I was feeling as someone that was queer, that parents did not accept, and was struggling to keep myself really alive in academia while being oppressed in the same systems, and recognizing that Satanism was, for me, was a way to lean into that darkness of where I felt safe and where I felt I was able to write a lot of the things that I was not able to express verbally. And I think that really guided me to understand the unknown and to be okay with the unknown, to be okay with uncertainty, and to be okay to feel that you don't feel okay. And I think that took a long time for me to recognize throughout those 4 years in college. But eventually, I left that religious structure, not because of certain things, but just because there was a point where I said I don't really agree with everything as much either. And I think that I wanted to really attach with this idea of having no labels when it comes to spirituality, because spirituality to me is a practice and a praxis, right? The idea of embodying those actions. And for me, knowing the fact that I value life, I value family, I value culture, I value species, that itself is an declaration of a birthright to me. And that's something that I wanted to hold.
Right, right. So, so what would how would you describe your spirituality today, in relation to the work you do, by loving Mother Earth and everything and everyone that she embraces?
Yeah, I think I pull a lot from different religious values and identities. I mean, to this day, I do pull a bit from Catholicism, some from Satanism, from Buddhism, some from Druidism or Druidry. I think it all shares common goals of being a better human being, right? Like being a better individual for society and for yourself. And the ways in which that's really been shown in my work is really practicing the main concept of interconnectedness and sacredness and mindfulness. I think mindfulness has been so helpful for me as an individual that is often running from place to place, from conference to conference, or doing extreme amounts of work, and recognizing that in order to ensure the protection of the planet, I need to protect myself. And that really looks into incorporating spiritual based practices in my life, such as meditation, sleeping, eating on time, having more fruits and vegetables as snacks, talking to people, talking to animals. These are all very simple things that humans can abide to, and recognizing how to divest away from exploitative and sometimes over consumerist lifestyles that allow us to continue to feel empty and hungry when in reality, I have enough already in my plate to be able to continue on with this movement.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you that question about self-care, you
Yeah.
know? Like how do you, what is your go-to for taking care of yourself, for all the work that you're putting out there and all the energy that you're putting out there to do the work that you do. Did you
Yeah.
want to add anything on top of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would like to say like I was actually in Vancouver last week for another event, but I went to a retreat on Hollyhock Island and on Cortez Island. It's off of Vancouver. And for me, what was really unique about this trip specifically was that I was really able to remind myself of practices that I had lost because it was a silent retreat in which we meditated, we slept, we napped, we listened to music, we wrote a lot, and just did not focus on our phones, did not focus on what the careers were doing. And it really reminded me that I thought I had lost myself for some time the last 3 years since doing social media and recognizing all of these things were done before. When I was younger, when I was in college, I just forgot how to incorporate them back into my life. And so since then, those practices look more into sleeping early, eating, like I said, going on walks, looking at the earth, talking to the earth, connecting with friends, laughing. These are all simple human and animal emotions that are expressed in our society. And why was that being lost? Because I was so ingrained in saying that my only productivity and my success is dependent on the work I produce. And my health was deteriorating the last 4 years, and I recognize that once your health is gone, no one really cares. If you're sick, no one will check in on you. And so I had to recognize it's time for me to ensure my well-being is great and that I'm able to also be there for others.
Yes, that's so important. Thank you for sharing that. And I wish I caught you when you were here in Vancouver. We were neighbors. I mean, I'm on, the mainland side of Vancouver, but it's good to know that you were in town. But health is health is the only wealth we truly have. From a place of spirituality, we know that the real wealth is our health, because without that, without our well-being, nothing can be done, and nothing can be seen, because we're probably hiding under our blankets if we're not well, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for saying that. I totally agree that a lot of the self-care, practical tools and ways of living we actually already knew, when we were kids.
Yeah.
When I started on my spiritual journey, my spiritual awakening, on my journey of becoming a healer, um, I reminded myself of things that I already knew when I was a kid, questions that I asked, about why am I here? Where did I come from? Those questions when I asked, when I was a kid were the same questions that I was asking myself when I had this spiritual awakening, which was 10 years ago, that set me off on this journey and path of becoming a spiritual healer. So thank you for sharing that. So what are the festivals, if you do have, in your life, that you celebrate with your family, with your loved ones, your community, that also ties into your spirituality?
Yeah, I think being Mexican is a very unique and complex identity because I think one thing I always tell people, and not you, of course, but like Mexican isn't a race, and it's a cultural identity, and it's a geographic location that was still built on colonization, and so the idea of what Mexican heritage or Latino heritage in Mexico looks like is very inspired and built with and on top of indigenous cultures. As someone that my half my family is Spaniard, settler colonialism, and my other half of my family were indigenous. So, like of course, as someone that does have still light skin privilege, still navigates the world as a brown person, it's been a very unique experience to be able to learn exclusively about the things that my parents grew up in, but also giving credit to where it's due. I mean, Dia de Muertos, or Day of the Dead, is a really monumental and very unique time in which you build a shrine for those who have passed away in the afterlife, and you make the bread to commemorate their souls and their spirits for them to be able to enjoy it, and wherever they may be. And I felt that as a young kid, I always loved it because I think the ways in which global north or like the white American culture depicts death is a very scary, displacing time, very traumatic time. But for a lot of people, recognizing that the reason why death is so scary today is that elders are isolated from their families. And in my culture, our families stick together until the day they die. I mean, as much as I can say I disagree with some of the way my parents treated me growing up, I wouldn't leave them. I know that they're going to be with me until they pass away in their older years, and recognizing that Day of the Dead was a way for people to celebrate the past life of that individual. And to me, I see that as true reverence and true connection, because that means you're honoring that person in your mind, in your actions, and in your home.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I've heard about that festival, way back, and I come from a Chinese background, and we have a similar festival like that as well. Every year we honor the dead. We would again also bring offerings like food and flowers and incense, so it's very very much part of my culture as well. And we do, I mean, from a Buddhist tradition, which is what I come from, belief in afterlife as well. So it's very very similar in that regard. And so how would you say that is connected to your environmentalism, about, this life not being limited to this physical existence.
Yeah, I mean, I look back to this idea of our species, right? We laugh at adults that talk to trees or hug trees or talk to animals, but that's all part of life. That's normal in terms of the ways in which we interact. Because I think on my end, what I tell people is that you like trees can hear us. The roots underground can hear the footsteps. Animals can know when things are going wrong or they need to protect themselves. So why is it that children are very deeply interconnected to playing with the earth? And I mean, like as a kid myself, I love to touch dirt. I love to put my hands in grass. Like I love to be able to just to smell fresh air and put my head against a tree and to talk to it. Now, those are types of ecological memories that are being lost today. And I think with the climate crisis, it's related to all the crises we are, right? Because everything is interconnected, like from spirituality to education, to resources. And I try to really remember myself as doing this work means recognizing that a lot of people feel empty and hollow inside when they're not, right? We all know that there's a new type of system that is forming in their hearts. But I do think that spirituality plays a huge role in order for us to continue grounding ourselves in doing the work that we need to do. Because I think there's a moment where you can say yes, logically and physically you can maybe figure things out, but there's things with spirituality that I feel that it's for the mind. It's mind care, right? Anyone can go to get a spa or massage and be like, I feel healed because I got physically massage. And I think for a lot of us, we don't practice that spiritual side because that's either been forgotten, that's been erased, or that's been severed in some people's cultural identities. But I think for myself, I really like that spiritual work because it really allows me to process everything that has been going on.
Yeah. Well, in the work that I do as a healer, I actually became reconnected to the spirituality that I actually come from, which is the existence of the spirit, of the soul. So you were talking about connecting to like the flowers, the plants, the animals, and they all have a consciousness, right? And
Yeah.
so the spirit is, I think, what, in my humble opinion, is what humanity has gotten disconnected from, that true essence within, and we forget that everyone and everything else also has that spirit, and including Mother Earth and the plants and the animals, that we got to, I would say, caught up with our own minds, you
Yeah.
know. So in the work that I do as a healer, we are actually trying to reconnect ourselves with spirit, and also tap into the power of our spirit, which we call the power soul. So I think by reconnecting ourselves with Mother Earth, and as you said, with plants and animals, it is one of the ways that we can reconnect with our spirit and the power we all have within, in each other as well.
Exactly. And I think the idea of people finding their roles in life, like some people are frontline activists, some people are hope keepers, some people are healers, some people are resource builders. There's different roles in which we really tap into in different ways. And I think that's what is the beauty of this diverse world, is that we just don't know what we'll fall into. And I think that's something that we all need to explore.
Yeah. So I'd like to ask you, because as an environmentalist, most of the stories that we need read in media are stories of alarm, right? Of bad news,
Yeah.
of like how the whole world is going down the drain, and so, like, how do you advise people, especially young people, to cope with the kind of stress and anxiety of climate action and climate change and everything else that's happening in the world, on the environmental side of things?
Yeah, I think in global north countries, we've kind of put this shame culture when people don't want to read the news because of their mental health, of like, oh, did you hear that this person was unalive? Did you hear that this environment's destroyed? Did you hear what's happening with government? It's like, I think there's obviously there should be criticism for inaction when people from privilege are not doing anything, but there's also should not be shame for those who are just trying to even survive to get to their next paycheck, or trying to feed their child, or try to even afford school and finish school on time. Like, these are real stressors that people face, and I feel that shifting from a problem identification mindset to a solutions oriented mindset is probably the most powerful thing to think of, and to really start to think more about local activism. Because I think, for a lot of us, I'm not going to be a US politician. That's not my trajectory. A lot of people tell me to go into politics, and I said, no, I'll probably have gray hair, all platinum by 30, by the stress that, US representatives would give me. But it's really honestly to me like a ways in which individuals can express themselves, and to really reorient themselves of what power they can give. Because the idea of consuming global news of like, this happened in Russia, this happened in Ukraine, this is happening in Asia, this is happening in Africa, like, it is so much for a young person to sometimes be consuming that media
Mhm.
so fast within 24 hours that the body cannot handle it, and that results in an inflammatory response. So I think on that end, it's about really looking about the ways that you can do change. And that starts with obviously the individual, but more community. And that's something I wish I could have done more now, than realizing doing this global work has really taken a lot of energy out of me. Because there's times where it's like, you have to do this interview, you have to go here, you have to travel there, you have to finish this. And it's like, wow, everything's moving so fast. And I just didn't know where to process or where to rest.
Yes, I can only imagine, because you are so sought after these days. Um, so how do you find that balance? So was that retreat that you went to Vancouver for part of that balance that you've been looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really reoriented myself as an individual. I think one of the biggest things I was struggling the last few years, I'd say, is the idea of feeling like traveling to new countries and new areas, I wasn't as invested to make friendships with people, just because I recognized that I was already missing out so much of my friends' lives here, from like weddings to birthday parties, to movie hangouts. Like, these are things that my friends kind of felt disappointed that I wasn't being there because I had to travel internationally. And not to say that they hated me or they didn't want to be my friend, they were just disappointed. And this retreat really, really galvanized me to just to say, like, when I'm traveling, I'm never alone. Home is always with me. Like, home is in the heart, home is in every step I take. And I started to reflect more and more is that I've always been a people person. I love to connect with people. I love to ask them questions about their life because I've always been very curious to know about what they do. And I feel like a lot of people don't always recognize that.
Hmm. So outside of your work, what drives you? What is your go-to, for relaxing or maybe leisure entertainment?
I think, some of the things I've been practicing now when I travel is just to go on random walks for 30 minutes with no headphones. Of course, I have my phone with me, but put it away and just walk and look at the structures, look at the people, look at the animals, look at the land. Like, I think I've become more of an observer because a lot of times I'm really forced to do public speaking or be there. And it's like a theater performance. And you come back, you're like, I really need to reset myself. And those are some of the things I've done fun. But the other thing is I adopted a dog recently. And I play with him. I got him last week, and he's been really a huge game changer in my life. And I think we both coexist with each other, and there's a lot of things we've been learning, and that's been really grateful to experience that.
Oh, that's so sweet. What's her name or his name or its name or
Yeah,
their name?
yeah, no, absolutely. His name is Tucker. He's a
Tucker.
very small white Maltese dog. He's like only 6, 7 pounds. He's really small.
Oh, Tucker Tucker is very lucky to have you.
Yeah, we came into each other's lives together.
Oh, that's so sweet. So tell us what's your like your biggest motivation for your work? Like, behind your work. What do you try to accomplish out of it?
I think the biggest thing and the biggest proudest moments of my work is that I was able to do this, like, not alone. I'm not self-made, but grassroots. Of I don't come from money. I don't come from nepotism. I don't come from much resources. Of course, I do have privilege. Living in the United States and getting a degree, of course, that's a huge, immense privilege. But I think being myself has allowed me to stay sustainable in this movement or to be known in this space just because I exist of who I am. I think, that's something that I feel like just being myself and being able to connect with people without assuming anything or without, expecting anything from anyone that has laid the groundwork to people to know who I am. And I think a lot of the times people don't know how tall I am because they see me on social media, and I'm 6'2", which is really funny because a lot of people who see me, they're like, I did not know you were that tall. And I'm like, yeah, I don't really post as much photos as I used to back in the day. But yeah, I did a lot. I was taking a lot of photos and was very tall. And like was very stylish, and then just really became who I wanted to be and someone more comfortable.
Right. So with your work, like what is the response that you've received from people, and again, what's your main message that you want to bring to the world through your work?
Yeah, my main message I want to bring to the world is that I want to teach young Black, Brown people of color that you have the power to create your story, and you should not wait for someone else to do it for you or someone else to co opt your messaging. You should be able to inspire yourself and connect with mentors and older people who are doing this work. And I think some of the messages I really like is sometimes the days I just feel really bad and don't feel like I'm making impact is those comments of people saying, you changed my life. And it's like, wow, sometimes I don't really think that. I just think I'm just here alone in myself. Or other people just telling me, like, it's honestly such like, you are someone I look up to in this space as someone that I could know that the career, what I'm doing now, is inspired by you. And it makes me really happy because I think younger Isaias always dreamed of, like, wanting to get a TV show and being a media host on Nat Geo or Discovery Channel. And I said, no, they'll never take a brown person or someone who's queer or someone who's weird. Like they only take the white, smart, individual people. They're the ones who are the experts, not me. But I think being able to do this through a grassroots and independent lens of like, look, I don't come from connections or money. I've had to really struggle to learn a lot of the things I am doing today has made me really proud that I want to share this information to younger people because I don't think they should take longer than me to figure these things out. Like I'm figuring them out by myself. And that's because it was really hard for me to ask for help because there was no one to ask to. And
Mm.
so for me to provide mentorship as I get older in this movement is honestly a blessing and it's also a privilege.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. It's so real and so candid, because, and I can absolutely empathize with that because I started out that way myself as a queer filmmaker. I and this is back in the 90s when there was no stories being told about, the um, lesbians and queers back in the day in Japan.
Mhm.
So that's how I got started. Also, is that nobody else is telling my story, so I have to do that. And this is again before even the age of social media. So you know, so your story, your message really resonates with me. And it was also the people who saw the films that I made who came to me and said that it meant a lot to them, that really helped me continue, in my career as a filmmaker, a queer filmmaker back in the day. So again, I know it takes a lot of courage and a lot of energy and time and all that. So I really want to congratulate you for the passion that you have, and um, doing the work that you do it, because I know it's not easy. It's not easy, even though we come from different fields. But in the world of media, especially as you said, as a BIPOC, and for me back then it was as a woman, as a lesbian,
Mhm.
nobody wanted to to hear you out. So what's the next best big thing now for you?
Yeah, I think on my end, I'm celebrating 6 months sober free. I don't really drink much the last 3 years since I think I stopped drinking heavily once I was 23. I really decided to take a sober free lifestyle. Um, and it's really been a huge game changer. Um, but I'm working right now on a book proposal, which I'm just revising one of the chapters because we're pitching to publishers in the fall. So hopefully, this has been 3 years in the process of writing this proposal. I'll finally, hopefully, we'll get a book offer from a publisher. I'm hoping that it gets picked up. And the other thing is just that I'm going to really work on more media projects that are independently produced and hopefully get more funding for that. And that just takes time, but working on new series.
Right. So have you done your own web series yet? I mean, anyone can do that on YouTube.
I am technically building it out. So the two series I'm building right now, one is called Teaching Climate Together, that pairs me up with grassroots activists or environmental scholars that talk about climate terminology. And we sometimes create a whole episode about the idea of the term, but more about like the ways in which they do research and how we interact. And the other one is called the Sustainable Job Series, where it goes into climate friendly related industries and we go in for a day and try to work at a sustainable company and see how that works. And that's been really amazing to see that.
So that those are in development right now.
Yeah, so the first one for our first episode is out. We released
Oh,
it last month. It
great.
was made with a $5,000 budget, but it was something that I felt really proud to say I did that. And I obviously don't come from a director or producer experience, but I'm a host and I know how to kind of host. So it was really amazing to do that.
Oh, so it's on your YouTube channel
Yes, yes.
that we can check out. Well, so everybody go check it out. I'm gonna go check it out myself. I didn't know about this. So congratulations for on that. That's great. And so how many are you planning to do? Like on what basis?
I'm just going to continue doing them until I get hopefully a TV show. That's really the goal to build my portfolio out and knowing the fact that, I'm not special. Sometimes I'm just gonna have to produce things and continue producing even if I don't get it. But I know that in the future I will get a TV show and I think it'll be very successful. I think right now I'm in a building era and I think I'm building things for myself. So I have the full autonomy to have full rights over that work that I produce.
Right, right. Well, good for you. I can't wait to see more, and definitely would love to have you back.
Yeah.
When you have your book, especially coming out, and also future shows. So thank you so much, Isaias, for your time today. Do you have any final words, for our lovely people out there, to encourage them to learn more about gay environmentalism and what they can do, for themselves to help Mother Earth go through this very, very tough period?
Yeah, continue to sustainably love yourself and create that circular relationship with the land, because the more that you're connected to yourself, the more that you can help connect with others and the more love that will prevail from this very, unfortunate times of hatred that is being perpetuated in global north countries and everywhere. But there is love that exists, that's a higher power level, that cannot be defeated.
Yes, and that's why I have also created this show, which is to bring more love and more light to this world. So thank you again, Isaias, for joining us today. Check him out. And we will post his YouTube and his you on Facebook and also on Instagram, all his socials. Follow Isaias. His work is so important. The love, the light, the wisdom that Isaias brings to us. So thank you again, Isaias. And I will see you again soon,
Yeah,
hopefully.
of
Yes.
course, we
So
will have to meet up.
so I'm going to close the show and I'll be right back.
Mhm.
So thank you so much, everybody, for joining this episode with the fabulous Isaias. Please check his work out and support him when you can. And this is Desiree signing out from Queer Love Light. Till we meet again, be queer, be love, and be the light that the world needs. Bye now.